The skills you see when you watch gymnastics are the building blocks of routines. But learning skills can be an incredibly long and sometimes grueling process. You have to go from the foundations, you need to be able to do the basics. You have to start doing preparations, or as we call them, preps, progress your way up to the full skill, repeat it hundreds of times, doing skills before and after, half routines, full routines. There's a very, very long process before you can get a skill from the point of first trying a prep to putting it in a routine. And today I'm going to be talking through that process, how gymnasts learn skills. I hope you enjoy. So to learn a skill, there's one thing that you absolutely need, and that is the foundations of the skill. You can't, for example, learn a Healy on P-bars without being able to do a swing to handstand. You can't do a Kovac on high bar without being able to do a giant. There's fundamentals that you absolutely need before you can do skills. And these are learned regardless. These are the very basic things that you'll do from when you are extremely young when you start gymnastics. You may think this is relatively unimportant to mention within the broader context of learning skills. But if one of those foundations, one of those basics is wrong or not quite right for that particular skill, then you may learn the skill incorrectly. You may start trying the skill and realize that you're slightly off because the basic is wrong. So you need to have a fundamental knowledge of what those would be for that particular skill, and therefore what you may need to go back to when you're starting to learn it. But that's relatively simple because it's relatively easy to figure out what you'll need to be able to do particular skills. Like, for instance, aforementioned giant or long swing on high bar to start learning Kovac, for example, or being able to do a round off flick before you can do a round off flick double back. Like, it's very obvious what you need to be able to do, or doing a tuck back before you can do a straight back, or doing a tuck back before you can do a double back, things like that. Straight back before you start doing twisting is another example. But one thing that may not be as obvious is how you then go from there to start doing preps. Preps are very individual to each of the skills that you will try and do. So depending on the skill that you're trying to work, the preps will be different. And there is absolutely no way that I'm going to be able to name every single prep for every single skill, because A, that would take hours, and B, people are actively still coming up with these, like new preps for skills, always being discovered, better ways of preparing the body and the mind to be able to do the skills, getting used to the motions, getting used to the rhythm of the skill. All of those need to be sort of encapsulated. You need to be able to get a feel for it before you end up just chucking it. Or it's a case of just chucking it, but doing it to a really safe environment. For example, you might just try and do a double back without doing any preps, but you're probably going to do it on a trampoline into a pit first, or a fast track into a pit first. You're not going to just chuck it on a floor first time ever trying to do a double back. So there is a gradual process to be able to start doing these preps. And sometimes the preps will themselves be preps for other preps. I know I'm saying preps a lot. I do apologize, but sometimes what you need is a gradual sort of building block progression towards a full skill, especially if it's a difficult or a scary skill. Scary skills are really, really tough to just go for, even if you've done preps beforehand. Imagine just trying to get up on the bars, never tried a Healy before, and do one. You'd be scared about everything. You'd probably just be holding a handstand for an hour and just not being able to do anything because you'd be scared of missing the bar or scared of kicking the rail. Like, imagine no pads, no nothing, no block underneath the bar, full height. You just got to go for it. Never done it before. Imagine how that would feel for those who have done a Healy before, I should say, or for those who haven't tried a Healy but have seen it or are maybe doing preps at the moment. Like, imagine just trying to go for it. And that's why these preps are so important. It's to mentally prepare you to be able to do the full skill. And I'll stay on Healy as the example here and go through sort of a step-by-step process of what you might see. So you'll probably start this when you're, I don't know, 13, 14, maybe earlier. And you'll start by doing on the floor 2 feet on a mat, do a handstand, you do a Healy turn, catch your hand underneath you and put your feet on the mat. Very simple and very low risk. Like, if you go wrong there's not much that can happen. Once you got that, then you start doing it to parallettes. So you start with your hands on the parallettes, do a Healy turn, feet on the mat. Once you've got that, then you can start potentially doing it in between 2 blocks, because blocks are a lot softer than the rails. It can be easier to sort of commit for. Or you could do it with one hand on a rail and then one hand on blocks. So you're in handstand, and depending on which way you turn, so your left hand is on the bar and then your right hand is on the block. And you turn on the hand that's on the rail, so you get a feeling for that, and then you put your hand back on the block because that's safer. And because if you go wide on that arm, you won't miss and scrape your ribs on the bar. Then you might start going in between the rails. So you might start actually doing it on the P-bars with a block underneath, with pads on the bars, with a mat on the bars, so you're safe. Then you might start gradually, so getting rid of the mat, getting rid of the block, maybe hiring the bars, then getting rid of the block, then getting rid of the pads, until finally you're at a point where you can do a Healy on the bars at full height with no pads, no block, no nothing. And this will take a very long time. For me, this took a very long time. This took months, if not years. Like I said, you might start this when you're 13, 14. You might only start competing this when you're 16, 17. So these processes take a long time. I mentioned in a recent video how in the gym, you have to be able to understand that things won't happen immediately. You need to be able to understand that it will be delayed gratification. But with this, you allow yourself to have little wins, I suppose. So first time doing this prep, then progress. First time doing this prep, and then this prep, and then this prep. First time doing multiple in a row. And you set yourself little goals. And by doing that, you can actually have constant motivation and something to work towards that isn't just the big goal of doing a Healy in a routine. Because if that's the big goal, that's potentially years down the line. And that's not going to be very motivating, especially as a teenager. And like I said, each of these preps will need a lot of reps within them before you can start to feel comfortable. And then once you feel comfortable, then you can start doing the next progression, or even just start doing more numbers of that prep so you can feel more comfortable with it. I know when I was learning Healy, I used to do threes. So I'd do sets of 3 Healys, get off, and then get back up and do another set of 3 Healys. I think I did probably 10 of those within a session because I really wanted to get it in a routine. This was back in 2021, so it was still a D at this point, so it was definitely worth my while. But I didn't skip out on the numbers. I just made it happen quicker. And by doing that, I didn't do a lot of other stuff. So I could have been working on things like undersemi or things like undersemi half, for example. Or eventually I progressed to doing the cuts and things like that, but I could have been working on things like tip out and that sort of thing. So doing this made it so I didn't do other stuff, but I got it really quickly as a result. So the amount of time you spend on one thing means times you're losing on something else. You always have to be aware of that, of what you could be doing otherwise. But eventually, like I said, you'll get the full skill. You'll be able to do it on high bars or on the tumble track or on pommel, like depending on what apparatus it is. And the next sort of stage, I suppose, is just doing repetitions, just doing numbers over and over again. And like I said, this is true for the preparations and it's true for the progressions and the preps, but it's also true for the full skill. So being able to do the full skill on its own over and over again. So for me, for Healy, it was doing it over and over again. Or for things like de-Russian on pommel, literally I would do sets of 3, doing as many as I could, just staying on the pommel until I failed one. So you know that it's consistent and that you can do it, if not 9 times out of 10 higher, because then once you get to that point, you can start putting skills in front or afterwards. And it may not be obvious to non-gymnasts, but gymnasts will definitely know that it is very difficult to do a difficult skill, once you've put it in a combination, once you've started to put something before or something afterwards. It becomes a different skill, basically. It becomes so much more difficult. Like, for example, if you've just put a release on the high bar, and then even putting it after a back up top on high bar, even that amount of something before it makes it so much more difficult to actually do it, because the swing is slightly different, how you feel is slightly different. And this is why you start doing the skills over and over again. This is why you do the skills depending on how easy the skill is and how repeatable it is within one go. This is why you do it over and over again, because that means that you can do it no matter where sort of your body is, because you won't always do the same thing on a specific skill into the next. So your body will be in a slightly different position. You might not be quite in the right handstand. You might have a quicker swing on the bar. You might be slightly off center on the pommel, and you have to deal with that. You have to be able to do the skill, but then also stay on and do it well, even though you're not where you normally would be, or you're not in the best possible position for it. This is true especially on things like parallel bars and horizontal bar, where the speed of the swing, or where your hands are on the rails on the P-bars, or how the grip feels on the P-bars, or on the high bar, I suppose, as well, matters so much that it can dramatically change how you do a skill. So well before you start doing half routines or you start doing full routines, you need to be able to put these skills in combinations, especially with skills before. Putting skills after isn't so difficult if you're landing in an optimal position on that skill. So if you do a skill on pommel, if you do like an E-Stockley on pommel and you end in a position where you're doing good circles, then you know that it would be relatively simple to do the next skill, especially if you've been doing it for a long time. So doing skills after isn't necessarily the be all and end all, but doing skills before, especially if it's a skill that you haven't really done a lot of reps of, is really important. But then once you've done that and you feel confident that you can do skills before and after, then you can start putting in half routines. And then once you've done that loads, you can start putting in full routines. So you can start getting a feeling for doing it basically when you're more tired. With a more difficult skill, it will more likely go in the first half. So it will be approximately the same for the specific skill that you're trying to do if you do it in the first half as when you do it in a routine. But one of the biggest things to make sure that you can do is get through a full routine with that skill in, because otherwise you don't know quite how you'll feel at the end of the routine, because sometimes skills can sap more energy than you think they do. I'll go back to the previous example of just doing a back apparatus half turn on the high bar before you do a release. Like, it's wild how different that can feel compared to just doing it on its own. And if that saps that much amount of energy, just imagine how much the actual release and catch will sap, especially if you don't catch it quite right. For example, doing a Stolder Catchev or Piatti, depending on what you call it, catching a bit close and then having to swing out. Sometimes you have to literally muscle it round, and that can really sap your energy for the rest of the routine. And if you can't handle that, then you can't handle it in a competition. Well, you might be able to, but you can't trust that you'll handle that in a competition because it's not the same. Obviously, you've got adrenaline in a competition. You can trust that, but you never know how much it's going to give you, and you might feel tired on the day. And if you can't do a routine when you're tired and you're tired on a competition day, you won't be able to do a routine. So this is why you need to do numbers. You need to practice for every possibility, and routine fitness comes not just in the routine itself. Again, we do 6 apparatus in men's artistic gymnastics. You need to be able to have this sort of fitness whilst doing the other apparatus. So in heavy weeks of routines, we'll do 2 or 3 routines per apparatus across all 6 apparatus. By the end, you are shattered. But if you can get through all of that, and if you can get through a control competition where you're doing proper competition timings, but you're moving around really quickly, then you know you can get through a competition which has the same circumstances. You can't control everything. You can't control how quickly you'll go around. You can't control what the temperature will be like. You can't control all of that. But if you try enough things, eventually you'll be so prepared that you can end up putting it into a you can put it into practice and you can be confident that you'll perform. But even still, if you've not competed a skill before, then it might break down. Sometimes even the easy skills break down, and that's a topic for another day. If you've not done a skill before and you're worried about that skill more than any of the others, then that skill will be the most likely to break down at the end of the day. And the only way I've experienced to get through that is either putting in an even harder skill in the routine, which doesn't solve the problem, it just shifts it to a different skill. And sometimes it doesn't even do that. Sometimes you just end up worrying about both. Or you do enough competitions with that skill in to the point where it just becomes muscle memory. It just becomes another one of those skills that you just have in your routine. For the longest time, Makutsu was that skill for me where it was a difficult skill. It is a difficult skill. But for me now, in my routine, I'm not worried about it anymore. I'm not worried about like falling off. I might. It's not 100% accurate, but it's so accurate to the point where I'm no longer worried about it. Same thing with things like Stutz in my routine. Like, I know I can do a Stutz. It sometimes doesn't work. Sometimes I have bad form in it. Sometimes I'll fall off. But like, at the end of the day, I've done it so many times and I've competed it so many times that it's now no longer a major stressor in my head. It isn't foolproof. It isn't something that will work 100% of the time, because nothing in gymnastics is. People fall on Stolders in routines that when they've done Stolders for years and years and years, things happen. But the best thing you can do is put yourself in the best position possible and be confident with all of your skills in your routine. Because when you get to that point, walk in the park. It's not, ever is. Routines are always, the routines that I've had have always been in some sort of like sweet spot where you've got difficult enough to the point where I'm never going to be 100% confident that I will go through a routine 100% of the time. Never will. But it's confident enough to the point where I know I can get through a routine. And so it's difficult to the point where I'm not 100% certain, and I never will be. And it's physically difficult for me to get through all the way through 8 skills, but it's not so challenging that I can't do it. And that's sort of the sweet spot that you have to find. It has to be difficult for you. Otherwise you could be doing more. You could be putting more difficulty out there. There's something to be said for doing easier routines. But if you're trying to push the caliber, if you're trying to push yourself and trying to put more skills in your routine, never going to be at the point where you're doing an easy routine. You're doing something that you're 100% confident that you're going to get through. So if you're going to try and push the caliber, that's a sort of sweet spot that you have to aim for. And if that means reducing, that means reducing. But you should always put yourself in a position where you're trying to get more out of your gymnastics, get more out of any routine that you're doing. If you're doing it for a team, that's a bit different. But doing it as an individual, why not? If you're doing it for an all-around score, maybe I can see a point in holding back a bit, but it shouldn't be holding back for the sake of it. It should be holding back because you know you get a better score doing that skill than that skill. And it's a balancing act. It always is. You're just holding back because you feel like you can't do it or you haven't put enough into it, then that's a different issue. And one thing I will sort of, I suppose, end it on, I haven't mentioned yet, but within all of these steps, you will have setbacks. You will struggle because even with the preps, you won't get things straight away. That's the point of doing the preps. The point of doing the preps is that you will not succeed straight away. I mentioned again in a recent video, but you need to know how to deal with failure. And it's failing forwards as opposed to failing and giving up. And that's the point of the preps. The point of the preps is to be able to fail in a safe environment, but make different mistakes and make changes and eventually get closer to the correct outcome. And once you've got the correct outcome on that one, then you make it more difficult. Then you try again and you make the mistakes. You'll make the same mistakes over and over again. Sometimes you can be so stuck in one specific way of doing it and it takes something drastic to make a change. Sometimes that's what you got to do. And sometimes you'll even need to go back steps. With all of these things, I've said a gradual progression from learning the skill first, competing it. You will go back steps. You will, without a doubt. But the point is that things will go backwards and they will feel like they're not going anywhere. You have to trust that things will click. They'll start to feel better. They'll feel amazing at one point and then they might go away. You might suddenly go, okay, how did I do that then? Like what am I doing wrong now? Because I was doing it this way. I was thinking about this thing. And then suddenly the next go, when you're thinking about the same things, something different happens. And you have no idea why that happens. But eventually you try enough things, you do enough reps and you do enough attempts, it will start to make some amount of sense. And you'll start to feel like you're actually making some progress with it. But it takes a while. It takes a good long while. And it's not going to look pretty. Things will look absolutely atrocious to start with. But eventually, you'll see some sort of improvements. This is within a competition prep as well. So you have to understand that a lot of different factors are at play. You have to understand that you're doing other routines within these sessions. You might be tired going into the parallel bar session or whatever it is, whatever apparatus it is that you're going on to, that means that you're trying to do the new skill. It's not a straight line. And as mentioned, things will start to get better, then they'll get worse, then they'll get better again, then they'll get worse. But you'll start to feel that eventually you can actually do what you were trying to do. And again, it will not be pretty. None of these are pretty. None of these are perfect gymnastics. But you can see that over time, they will get better. And then you'll be able to start cleaning it up. The point is that you need to put it on first. You need to be able to actually do the skill. If you're trying to clean it up before you've even tried the skill, then it's not going to work. But you can't run before you can walk. And if you've taken a backward step, you can't pretend that you haven't. You have to respect it and you have to move forwards with it as time permits and as your ability and how the skill is going permits. So the biggest thing about learning the skill is being patient with it and understanding where you're actually at and understanding how you can improve. Because if you try and rush it, if you try and put loads of effort in, if you try and do too much, then that can be just as detrimental as doing nothing at all, or more detrimental than doing nothing at all. If you're getting in your own head about it, if you're starting to worry about it, that again, it can be hugely detrimental. So again, there will be setbacks, there will be issues, but when you're trying to learn a skill, when you're trying to put those numbers in, you have to be patient. You have to understand that things will go wrong. Things will look absolutely terrible. And you will have to put hundreds, if not thousands of numbers in before you can even start making a little bit of progress. But that is the way it is. And there isn't really a quicker way of learning skills, especially when they're difficult, especially when they're scary. Again, those are the hardest skills to learn. And some things might seem like overly technical, like you need a million different things to be right to get it right. But eventually you'll find your way of doing it, and you have a decent margin for error within it. Like Diamidov might seem like the hardest skill in the world. You're literally on one arm for the majority of it. And yet you'll see people that do it super easily, that can do it 5 different ways and still get to handstand and still do it cleanly. So all you need is your way of doing it, and that's enough. And eventually you'll find it. You will get there. But I hope this gives some insight into what us gymnasts actually do, and a reminder to all the gymnasts to respect the game, to respect the fact that things take a long, long time. Things will be difficult, but that doesn't mean that you're not moving in the right direction. That does not mean that you're doing anything wrong. It just means that gymnastics is difficult, because it is. It's one of the most difficult sports in the world. So you're doing great, and you'll get there eventually. But thank you for listening to the Game of Gymnastics podcast. I hope you've enjoyed. Leave a like if you've enjoyed, follow for more, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.